This is the Patriots Catch-22 podcast with Evan Lazar and Alex Barth.
I'm Evan Lazar. Evan Lazar.
Hello, everybody.
Nailed it. Joined as always by our Barth. That's a fit. That's a match. No risk it, no biscuit.
22.
Here is Evan Lazar and Alex Barth.
William Shakespeare was an English playwright, poet, and actor.
Yeah, I'm not calling him a poet.
Boom,
Sorry.
roasted. All right, fine. Just like his official biography disagrees.
What, on Google? Yeah, that Wikipedia, real good source. Anyways, this is not the point. This is not the point.
Britannica, whatever it is, the big book, the one that has all the facts.
The big book with all the facts.
Yeah.
Okay, let me finish my analogy.
Shakespeare expert
So,
Evan Lazar. William Shakespeare expert Evan Lazar.
I wasn't big.
X's and O's, grinding tape, and William Shakespeare.
Can you just let me finish the point? Oh no! I got a lot of flack for that, Marine. Evan doesn't know Shakespeare. Stick to football, Evan. You don't know what you're talking about. Shakespeare wrote sonnets. He was amazing as a poet. I don't know, like Macbeth,
The playwright in my eyes.
Hamlet. Those are the things that I remember from obviously Julius Caesar, which was the point we were going after there. That Alex you just didn't let me get it out. No surprise there. Alex, you were a little questionable for today's show, though. You were on the injury report, listed as questionable with an illness. How are you doing, buddy? How you feeling?
I'm doing better. You're definitely going to have more windows to talk today. This is the first show I've done of any kind since Sunday, so we'll see how my voice holds up.
Yeah,
it's going to be short, sweet, and to the point today.
I appreciate you toughing it out for us, and there's no Catch-22 without either of us, right? Like, then there's just no show, and there's a lot to talk about. So we're gonna push through, and Alex is gonna push through for you guys. And I am upset for you though, Barth, because we're gonna preview the Senior Bowl here in a few minutes, and this is like your Super Bowl. This is one of the biggest weeks out of the year for you. So I'm a little bit I'm worried that you're not going to be able to get all your takes about Michael Pratt and whoever out in this one.
Come on, that's not the quarterback I'm going to have all the takes about. It's not Michael Penix either.
Oh, okay, all right, good tease. But before we get to it, and the phone lines are like just lighting up. I don't know if they're working on them or whatever, but both. Oh my goodness. Okay, so we'll get to the calls in a few minutes here, but I want to start with the latest on the Patriots coaching search. And Alex, I'm going to ask you as best as you possibly can to walk me off a little bit of a ledge here with the Patriots offensive coordinator search. We were texting about this a little bit last night, but basically where we're at right now, the Patriots have only interviewed 2 known candidates who are free agents, or not, I shouldn't say free agents, but are just available at the moment, because Dan Pitcher in Cincinnati, he took the job as their offensive coordinator, as everybody expected. And Shane Waldron, who the Patriots did show some interest in, he's off the board. He's going to Chicago to coordinate the Bears offense. So that leaves the Patriots with the 2 Rams guys that we know. And I want to stress that, because because it hasn't been reported doesn't mean that they haven't interviewed other people.
I don't think that Waldron one was reported right till after he took the job in Chicago.
Correct. Yeah. So he takes the job in Chicago, and then it comes out after the fact that he did have a first round interview with the Patriots. So right now we have Zach Robinson, we have Nick Caley. And I do think that it's worth saying, and I know that some fans are not gonna love this, but it's worth saying that Josh McDaniels, I believe, is lurking in the background, waiting to see what happens with Bill Belichick. If Bill Belichick gets a job, I would expect McDaniels to follow him to his destination, probably Atlanta. If Bill Belichick doesn't get a job, then I would expect him to go, as I think Jeff Howe, The Athletic, I believe it was Jeff Howe, reported, kind of go to the top of the list a little bit here for Jerod Mayo in terms of Patriots offensive coordinator. Here's my walking off the ledge moment. Here's my concern right now. I look across the league at some of these up-and-coming hot coordinator candidates, guys like Zach Robinson, guys that are interviewing for these jobs that are popular right now around the league. And I'm trying to figure out, why would they take the Patriots job? And I look at a few factors. One, the Patriots don't have a quarterback as of right now. So what you're selling them on is probably taking a quarterback at the top of the first round and you get to work with one of these, quarterback prospects. And if you like the guy that you're in lockstep with the Patriots, that you might like Jaden Daniels, you might like Drake May, and you can maybe build around that. I guess that might be appealing. But overall, it's a challenge. It's going to be a big challenge for whoever takes this job to put the pieces together, to develop the quarterback, to maybe change the system, which I think that they would at least like to consider doing. Obviously they've interviewed a lot of people from the Sean McVay West Coast system tree, the Shanahan McVay tree, and I think they would like to change the system. So that's a lot of change. It's a lot of unknowns. And I just look at their options, these other coordinators, and I would also mention that Brian Callahan in Tennessee now, but in Cincinnati before as their coordinator, is a great example of this. Brian Callahan never called plays for the Bengals. Never called plays. Zach Taylor was the play caller. So this allure of calling plays, I don't necessarily know if that is that big of a thing, because these guys are getting head coaching jobs elsewhere without calling plays in the first place. So what is it that is attractive about New England other than it's a challenge? It's you get to run your own ship, and if it works out for you, if you hit a home run and you develop the quarterback and do this, that, and the other thing, then you're Bobby Slowick, right? Like then you're the next big coordinator candidate here.
Look, I think you just hit on a lot of it. I think you're just underselling some of how big these points are. I think if somebody really is enamored with Drake May or Jaden Daniels, then obviously, yeah, come on down. And, you look at some of the other spots where there's open jobs. Are the quarterback situations as attractive as hypothetically having one of these guys that's going to be a top 3 pick? I think to kind of go from another angle at one of your points, you are going to get to call your plays. You're working for a defensive coach. There is no, trying to like with Brian Callahan, like, is it him? Is it Zach Taylor? I think the most obvious example of this phenomenon is Eric Bieniemy. He's behind Andy Reid for all those years. And it's, is it, how much is Eric Bieniemy really doing? How good of a coach is now? I thought, relatively speaking, he did a good job in Washington last year. And I think he was responsible for a lot of the Chiefs' success. You see what's happening now, but it's a question people are going to ask. No disrespect to Jerod Mayo, but nobody's going to ask, well, is it really Jerod Mayo's offense, right? You are going to have pretty much full autonomy. You should have full autonomy if your side of the ball as an offensive coordinator here. And I think to combine that with another one of your points, that helps accelerate to the next job. Because I think if, like you said, if the offense explodes here, nobody else is getting credit from a coaching point of view.
Yeah.
Nobody, and maybe like roster building people get credit, Mayo gets credit as a motivator, but if it's like all crisp, clean, schematically, it's working, the quarterback's developed, that's falling on one person. And that's obviously, if you want to be a head coach in 2025, I would say the Patriots job is one of the most attractive in terms of upside. Now the floor is a little lower, but if you can get this thing to work, you're in great shape. So I do think there are certainly attractive elements to it. Is it the most attractive job? No, but it's hardly the least attractive job either to me, especially now that you have, I thought the Bengals and actually Chicago were two of the more attractive jobs. Chicago, obviously, they'll have, we expect they'll have Caleb Williams. So but yeah, no, you keep texting me like, so it's going to be Josh McDaniels, right? Which one, every time you text that to me, because I've obviously kind of been in and out, keeping track of the news the last couple of days, I'm like, all right, who hired Zach Robinson? Who hired Nick Caley? Who hired Jerod Johnson? And also when you text me that, I'm thinking, so what does that mean for Bill?
Right.
Because McDaniel's probably going to follow Bill if and when Bill goes. So, yeah, I don't see it in that picture yet. Is there a path to it ending up being Josh McDaniels? Absolutely, 100%. But it hardly feels like a guarantee right now. And yeah, you mentioned Caley and Robinson. I wouldn't sleep on the Texans guys either. And likely Slowick's going to get a head coaching job. I think he actually just or is about to interview with the Falcons. I think I saw a report on that. But you figure between Ben McDaniels and Jerod Johnson, one of those guys is going to get the bump up to OC. I think Jerod Johnson's already interviewed with a couple other teams. That's a guy I would like to see the Patriots talk to.
Yeah, I just think when it comes to Zach Robinson, you really, if I'm Zach Robinson, I'm not sure I'm taking the New England job. I think he's going to have a lot of opportunities here in the next couple of years. He could probably stay with the Rams and potentially get himself a head coaching job in a year or two, just based off of being with McVay and his reputation around the league. I look at those types of guys like the Zach Robinsons and say that he's going to have the pick of the litter of all these jobs. And I think a big part of the reason people are wondering, well, what's taking so long? And I know the Bears filled their position pretty quickly with Shane Waldron, but I think one of the things that's taking so long is that there's still 4 teams that don't have a head coach yet. So until we know who those 4 hires are going to be, and then now we still have some teams like last night, Jim Harbaugh, is the coach of the Chargers. Like those teams don't have staffs either. So until some of these dominoes start to fall, you never know who some of these hot coordinator candidates or free agent candidates are going to end up, like a McDaniels, where they're going to end up going, because there's a lot of there's a lot of balls in the air right now in terms of the coaching cycle.
I would just say on Robinson, in to that point, that he can wait. You get a better title, you have more control, you get to run your own show, you probably get paid more too. If he's going to be that complacent with him, be like, I'll be a head coach eventually, whatever. That's kind of, doesn't that attitude kind of scare you?
Yeah, I suppose, but I guess where I'm coming from is more from the fact that if it goes wrong here, then you're in career rehabilitation mode after that. Whereas if you stay where you're at and you know that it's going to be successful, or you take another job that's a better job, then maybe you're not in that same book, or that in that same on that same path.
So he could get a better job this year, but there's a finite amount of offensive coordinator jobs.
I just look at Bill O'Brien, and first of all, just reading the tea leaves of that whole situation, I don't think Bill O'Brien could have gotten out of here fast enough after last year. I don't think he had any real interest in coming back. Some of that's obviously because Bill's not the head coach here anymore, and Bill's his guy. But I look at that situation, and now he's going back to college, which I don't think he really wanted to be in the college game. And he's technically co-offensive coordinator at Ohio State, right? With your guy, Brian Hartline. So he basically took a demotion just to get out of here. And I don't think that his services at the NFL level, because there are some openings around the league, he could have potentially latched on with Bill someplace else, things like that. I don't necessarily think that there was a ton of options for him because of how whether it was his fault or not, and I think both of you and I have absolved him of a lot of wrongdoing from last year with the Patriots. He coordinated one of the worst offenses in the NFL last year. That's just the bottom line. And I look at some of these guys, and if I was them, I would just say the Patriots, it's more the Patriots selling me on the job than the other way around if I'm like a guy like Zach Robinson, where I need to hear from New England what their plan is to upgrade personnel-wise. Because remember, you have a first-time head coach here in New England. You also don't really know from the outside looking in who's running personnel. And I think that this is part of the other problem with all of this, is that when you don't go out and make a real GM hire, these candidates on the coaching carousel, they don't necessarily know who's in charge, which I think is something that's a little bit tricky as well. So if you don't know,
you don't think they'll ask in the meetings, and you don't think the Patriots would tell them if they really want the guy, they'll lay out the organizational structure. I get they won't lay it out for us, but you don't think they'll lay it out for them if they really want it, if it's a guy they really want?
I think they would, but I'm just saying that if I'm a guy like Zach Robinson, again, that's my first question, right? Is, well, who's picking the players around here? Like, who's the personnel guy? Who's got final say? Who's the guy that's going to be picking the groceries for me? And am I going to have say? Maybe that, I think out of all the things that you could maybe sell one of these coordinator candidates on, it's them being allowed to have some say in the personnel side of things. Like they have, let's take Zach Robinson, kind of stay with that. With Zach Robinson, like he wants to come here in New England potentially and build like a Sean McVay offense. So to him, it's probably, this is the quarterbacks in the draft that I like for that offense. These are the type of receivers that I need. These are the type of linemen that I need. And maybe he has a way, some say in being able to put all those things together, because I did want to talk about this a little bit. When you start to talk about making this McVay offense here in New England, which I think based off of the interviews that the Patriots have had at the coordinator spot, it does seem like Jerod Mayo wants to go in a different direction schematically and would prefer to go in a Sean McVay type of direction.
Minus that whole Josh McDaniels report.
Minus Josh McDaniels, who I think is obviously getting his name floated out there because of more or less of his reputation and not necessarily like the tea leaves. Like if every other coordinator that they've interviewed has been from the McVay tree.
No, so, there was a report when Mayo first got hired that was he would he preferred, not preferred, but like he was very interested in McDaniels as his OC.
I could see that. I mean, why wouldn't you be, right? And I know that some Patriots
Right.
fans are going to look at it and say, "Oh God, not McDaniels, not a retread again, yada yada yada." But I think the bottom line, and we've talked about this with a guy like McDaniels, Alex, is that he has head coaching experience and he has coordinator, head coach of the offense coordinator type experience. Where for a first-time head coach, having a guy that's that experienced on that side of the ball that can run the show, basically offensively, is really appealing. Whether you agree with Josh McDaniels' schematics, whether you want to go back to their old system and stick with what they've been doing around here for the past 25 years or not, the experience factor is a big one with McDaniels. Whereas with some of these other guys, Cayley, Robinson, even Pitcher, like those guys haven't run the show yet.
Right.
So who knows? But just going to like the McVay stuff quickly. If you look at some of the things that their hallmarks, right? In terms of formations, they run a lot condensed formations, 3-receiver condensed formations. In those 3-receiver, the type of receivers that they like in San Fran and in LA are bigger, stockier, explosive receivers that can block. They don't necessarily like the Pop Douglases. And I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a spot in the offense for Pop Douglas, that I think there would be. But you think about the Rams, you think about Cooper Kupp, you think about Puka Nacua, right? Like those guys are bigger guys, bigger, sturdier receivers. Right. A big reason why is because they run a lot of 11 personnel. So those guys are asked to block a lot at the point of attack in the run game.
And the condensed formations too. So they're, not out on an island with a corner where they can just kind of lay it.
Right. So they're basically blocking. They're basically having like tight end type assignments in the run game. And that means that you have to have some size to you. You have to be able to block and hold up inside like that. They also really like, yards after catch are a big part of it. So they look at good route runners, good blockers, explosive ball carriers, right? Like those are the Deebo Samuels, the Brandon Ayuk's, the George Kittles, obviously in San Francisco. And then I just mentioned the 2 guys in LA. So that's a very specific type of receiver. And I'm sure on this program, if they do hire Zach Robinson to be the offensive coordinator, for example, we're going to talk a lot about the type of receivers in this class and how they fit into that system. And it's not going to be, I mentioned to you last night, Barth, that I was watching Troy Franklin from Oregon.
Right.
It's not going to be Troy Franklin, right? Like the 185-pound receiver soaking wet is not going to be the guy that you're going to put in the Puka Nacua role in this offense. It's just not going to work out. So that's a big part of it, as well as that if they're going to go in this different direction, then they need to start building the scheme in this different direction. So I understand where you're coming from, and I know that I don't want to be like too alarmist about it, the whole thing. I don't think it's that dire that they're not going to be able to find somebody to take the job or anything like that.
You do need to breathe on this stuff. It's once a day I'm getting a text from you about it.
It's just that's
when
that's
nothing
the
has
chatter,
changed.
man.
Like
Because
it's one thing if you text me when somebody got a job and you're like, oh, this guy's off the board, but
I don't think it's
there's just no news and you text it to me. I don't know. You need to take a walk.
There's not a lot of positive buzz coming about this job. I'm just gonna say it to you that way. It's not a very desirable job, and I think the biggest reason why is, like I just said, you have to. It's a risk. It's a risk that if it doesn't work out, then you're gonna have to go tail between the legs, back to Sean McVay in LA and be like, save my career. It's a big risk in terms of what it's a ball of clay, but it's not necessarily a very known commodity going on here. In Chicago, maybe they draft Caleb Williams, but they also have Justin Fields, and you know who Justin Fields is. And Justin Fields hasn't flamed out quite as hard as Mac Jones has yet. So maybe Shane Waldron believes that he can fix Justin Fields. Maybe Shane Waldron believes that with Marvin Harrison Jr., he can definitely fix Justin Fields. And I don't know if the Patriots have that. I don't think Mac Jones around the league, his rep right now, he's fixable. I think they need to move on. They need a clean break from both sides. So I hear you. I understand that, I'm a little bit worried about it. I'm not going to lie. I am a little bit worried about it. So we can talk about the coordinators. I think on the defensive side of the ball, quickly, it does really sound like DeMarcus Covington is going to get that job as the defensive coordinator for the Patriots. But the two things that I'm interested in, some of these guys that they've interviewed, other than him, like Hodges from the Saints or Christian Parker from the Broncos, who's a really well thought of defensive backs coach, and those two guys from externally. Let's start there. I wouldn't be surprised if those guys are being interviewed with position coach roles potentially in mind, like they did last year with Adrian Clem. So maybe Christian Parker, depending on what happens with Belichick's staff, Mike Pellegrino, Brian Belichick, maybe Christian Parker is brought in to coach the secondary. Hodges is maybe a candidate for linebackers coach. I would say the same thing about Tem Lubica as a coordinator for a candidate for linebackers coach. So all of those things make sense if that's the staff, right? Jerod Mayo obviously is the head coach, has a big hand in the defense. DeMarcus Covington is the defensive coordinator, and then those guys are filling in the staff on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, well, Hodges is interesting because he was co-defensive coordinators with DeMarcus Covington at Eastern Illinois, I think in 2016, before they both jumped to the NFL. So those two guys that know each other have a working relationship, and if you're Covington now, you're running your own staff, having a familiar face there definitely makes a ton of sense. The other guy that really interests me, you mentioned, is Parker, simply because he's not a cornerbacks coach and he's not a safeties coach. He's a defensive backs coach.
Yeah.
That's his title. The Broncos don't employ people in those two other titles. They have an assistant defensive backs coach, but how many times have we heard Patriots corners and safeties, we ask them about their position room and they say, well, we're all defensive backs. We all consider ourselves one position. That is definitely, and you see it with guys like Jonathan Jones and guys like Miles Bryant. That is definitely a core philosophy within the building.
Yeah, absolutely.
So a guy with Christian Parker's experience working with both positions and kind of tying them together in one group, if that's a philosophy they want to carry over, talk about a guy that has the perfect mindset to do that. I don't know how many other teams. I know some teams will have a cornerbacks coach, a safeties coach, and then an assistant defensive backs coach who kind of floats between the two. I don't know how many teams just have one defensive backs coach and nobody specifically with the corners or safeties. So if that's something the Patriots want to emphasize, talk about a uniquely qualified guy to do that.
Yeah.
Andy worked with, I'm going to be bad at names today, Patrick Surtain.
Right.
And he helped with the rise of Patrick Surtain, which is a nice thing.
Especially for Christian Gonzalez, right? Bring him in. And
Similar kind of player, too.
Very similar kind of players. Christian Gonzalez has talked about Patrick Surtain as somebody that he watches and tries to emulate a lot. So I could definitely see that those two guys working well together. And like I said, with Brian Belichick, with Mike Pellegrino, if Bill gets the Falcons job, then those two guys, I would say there's a good chance that they follow him to Atlanta. So you're starting over in the secondary is my point, coaching wise.
Right.
If you can bring him, a guy like Christian Parker in, to be the DB's coach, and then maybe you get him an assistant, and then he's sort of coordinating the back end. And then DeMarcus Covington, who's got more experience up front with the defensive line, he then coordinates the front end of the defense and the front seven and the line of scrimmage, and then you kind of marry it together, right? And that's how a lot of teams have done it in the past, and a lot of teams do it in general, going all the way back to Bill's days in Cleveland with Nick Saban, right? Where those two guys, one was more of a coverage, secondary coach. One of them was more of a front pressure type of coach, and they were able to combine both of their brains and build out a defense from the inside out from there. So definitely a doable situation. I like that. The other thing I wanted to touch on, and then we're going to take the calls, because the call screener is lit up. We got 4 people on hold. We really appreciate it. 855-PATS-500 is the phone number. We're going to get to all these in a second. Steve Belichick. I'm really interested to see what happens with Steve. So I was talking, I wrote a piece on Patriots.com with a couple of the former players, Devin McCourty, Dante Hightower, Jamie Collins, Brandon Spikes, who was really fun to catch up with. Brandon Spikes, by the way, Alex, guy you'd like run through a brick wall for. That guy.
I've always loved Brandon Spikes.
Oh God, that guy is got that just intensity that you just love.
What do you got to do to get him on the staff?
Right. Well, he's actually working at Florida.
He is. That's right.
Yeah, with his alma mater. So he's I don't know if he has an official coaching title or if he's more just kind of like a recruiter / football liaison type of person. But he's working down in Florida right now. But in general, just talking to these guys, Devin McCourty kind of laid out for me what exactly Jerod and Steve did behind the scenes, because I know this was a big question for a lot of people the last couple of years, like who was doing what. And it was pretty much exactly what you might have thought, but it was cool to have somebody that was in the building, that was in the room, actually lay out exactly how it went. And he said that Jerod was more of like the motivator. He'd get up to the front of the room. He'd lead a lot of the meetings and be the guy that was, sort of the front-facing guy. And he would get up there and he would say what the mentality, what the mindset that they needed to play the game with. And I'm this is me speaking. I'm kind of, just guessing, things like we got to stop the run. We got to do this. We got to play tough on this spot. We got to be physical here, like things like that, right? More of like a mindset or a overall big picture type of view on things. And then Steve would come in and he would talk about how the game plan and the calls that they were actually going to call on the sheet, how those things would tie together to the things that Jerod was talking about. So it was like Jerod was like the motivator, big picture guy, and then Steve was like the X's and O's, this is how we're actually going to go out there and do it type of guy. And that worked. That relationship really worked. Those two guys have been really close. We see them around each other all the time, around the facility, on the road, things like that. I think that there's a really good argument to try to keep Steve around. And I know he hasn't formally interviewed for the defensive coordinator position, and I know Mike Reese has floated out maybe a assistant head coach title instead of a defensive coordinator. But whatever it ends up being, whatever his title ends up being, I would be making a pitch for Steve to stay, whether or not his father gets a job or not.
Yeah, I've been on you with that, and I think there's a case he does. You just look at the personal element of it, having to move his family right and all of that. And
yeah, it's a good point.
This is where he's from. Obviously, he's born and raised here. So the draw of coaching with his dad is obviously significant. The other thing, and I don't want to speak for him, but looking at it from the outside looking in, you figure Steve's going to want to coach after his dad is retired. And I think it could help expedite that to kind of go out on his own, right? And he's not totally out on his own in New England. We don't know what his role would be. It's not like he probably isn't going to be a coordinator outright, but whatever he's in charge of has success here. I think that probably helps expedite that process a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get to these calls. I've never seen this before, Marine. I've never seen the whole screen filled like this before. This is pretty cool. All right, so let's go through the calls.
It's the off season, man. It's an off season show.
People are into it, man. Eric is in New Jersey. What's up, Eric?
Evan, I have to push back on one of the philosophies that you've been saying for, you can't necessarily draft a receiver. I don't believe necessarily that we have to draft Marvin Harrison. But I just really think that it's the quarterback that you're going to get is, you're fighting for Jaden Daniels. I think May and Williams are going to go first. So with that being said, because look at the Cleveland. They had Joe Thomas, Joel Bettino, Alex Mack. They built that lineup. Still didn't get a quarterback behind that. So, I think there's a couple ways you can skin a cat, to get to where you need to get to. But with that being said, who do you see if we had Jaden Daniels, who would be the best offensive coordinator to work with him here? And I'll take it off the line. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, so I've been pushing back a little bit, Alex, as you could imagine, on the Marvin Harrison Jr. thing, because part of it is, I'll be honest with you, I've heard this take from so many different people in my replies, in my mentions, the calls. We got to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. We got to draft Marvin Harrison Jr. And I just want to play devil's advocate, right? Like, there are a lot of really good arguments for taking Marvin Harrison Jr., but it's not the only way to go. Just as the caller just said.
Can I give you a fun fact I think a lot of people are missing?
Yes.
Marvin Harrison Jr. is not the last wide receiver that will ever be available in the NFL draft. In fact, he's not the only good one available this year, and there will be other drafts after this year too. So just to remind people that, yes, he's a tremendous player. He's not the only good wide receiver in college football. He won't be the only good wide receiver in college football.
Yeah, it's a good point. I subscribe to the theory, and this is just my take on roster building. You can disagree with me, that's fine. But my take on roster building is that you build from the inside out. I think that the best teams are built from the inside out, and I think that all the shiny new toys in terms of the weapons or playmakers, whatever you want to call them on offense, those always come after, for the most part, after you've built out the other areas of your team. And I look at the teams that are currently sitting in the championship weekend right now, Alex, and all four of these teams are built that way. All four of them. And I'm talking about on offense. And when I say inside out,
yeah,
the quarterback plays in the middle of the field. So I count the quarterback, right? Like quarterback, offensive line, and then once you have that structure, quarterback, offensive line, offensive system, once you have that structure in place, that's when you make the trade for Christian McCaffrey. That's when you go out and you get, weapons in the draft like Detroit did, Jahmyr Gibbs, Sam Laporta. They did all those types of things. These teams that are left standing have done all those, the extra cherries on top once they've already had the rest of the stuff in place. So when the Lions went into last year's draft, well, yeah, the Lions don't need to take an offensive lineman because their offensive line's absolutely loaded. So, and they like Jerod Goff, so they didn't have to take a quarterback. So Jahmyr Gibbs and Sam Laporta, with two of their first three picks, made sense for them. Those were two skill player guys in positions of need for them that could come and put them over the top, and that's exactly what it's done. You look at Baltimore. That team is completely built from the inside out offensively because of
always
Lamar.
Has been.
And they are probably one of the best roster building teams in the league in my mind. So I am just looking at it, and I get it. Some Patriots fans look at it and say, well, it's a 2 to 3 year rebuild anyways, so let's just take the best player available. The safest pick is Marvin Harrison Jr. because he's the most talented player in the draft. And maybe you're right. Maybe you're right about that. I just look at it the other way. I look at it as Calvin Johnson in Detroit, Larry Fitzgerald in Arizona until they had that 1 year with Kurt Warner.
Terrell Owens his whole career.
Terrell Owens his whole career. And then right now, just a current example is Garrett Wilson with the Jets, who has back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, offensive rookie of the year last year with New York in 2022, and they can't win anything. And why? Because they don't have a quarterback. They don't have an offensive line that blocks well. They have a lot of holes elsewhere on the roster. So, yes, you could draft Marvin Harrison Jr. and you could do it. You could build it out properly around him and do all these different types of things. But I just think I will always subscribe to the theory that that's the last piece. The receiver is the last piece that you add to it. Because if you don't have anybody that can block and you don't have a quarterback that can get him the ball, it's a waste. You're wasting away the best years of his career and the cheapest years of his career with a team around him that can't get him the football.
There's very little evidence that you can start a rebuild with a wide receiver, successfully start a rebuild. I mean, teams have tried to do it. And I texted you this week. I actually feel like Patriots fans overrate Marvin Harrison Jr. a little bit, not in the sense that he's not a great player, but he's not going to come in and fix everything. He doesn't come in and then suddenly, you're a top 10 offense. And that's not to say like, yes, they'll add an OC. All right, so you hire an offensive coordinator, you add Marvin Harrison Jr. If you don't touch anything else, you're still a bottom half offense in the league. Do you tick up a little bit? Yeah, probably. But you're talking about, compared to, you look at, Evan, you've talked about this, the Houston Texans being the model for the Patriots.
Yeah.
You hit on the quarterback position. The Texans, I'm not going to say that their receivers are bad. They're solid. They're better than the Patriots, but do they have a Marvin Harrison Jr.? Do they have a Gary Wilson? Do they have that real, like Tank Dell's a fun player.
Nico Collins is good.
He's good, but I mean, is Nico Collins one of these like household names?
That's like, say, the Texans are a perfect example.
But that's what I'm saying. Like
they should be going and getting the number one receiver this offseason, right? Like,
right. Exactly. So that's where I look at it. Like you look at what a quarterback can do compared to you look at what a wide receiver can do. And it is a rebuild. You are starting from scratch. So why not shoot for the moon? Why not go big or go home? And that's taking a quarterback. So
yeah,
I just, you talk about the impact the position can have. Nothing touches quarterback in terms of that impact. And nobody's going to debate that. Even if you're a big Marvin Harrison person, you can't debate that. Quarterback is the ultimate impact position.
Yeah. I can't stress enough how terribly awful the Patriots offensive line was last year. And this is sort of that argument of, let's take the quarterback out of it for a second. Let's say they do their homework on the quarterbacks and for whatever reason they just don't like them. Right? I'm not saying that I agree with that. But let's just
I don't either, but somebody said yesterday that they like at least two of them, but I've said this before and I'll put the qualifier on it. If you don't like the quarterback, don't take a quarterback just to take a quarterback.
Right, that's how you end up with Zach Wilson. So you look at,
well, no, they had options with Zach Wilson and they still took him.
That's true. But there are other options I don't think were. I mean, Justin Fields is a better option. I shouldn't say that. The offensive line was dead last in pass block win rate last year. I have no idea who's coaching that group right now. I don't think it's going to be Adrian Clem. So that's another opening that they're going to have to fill. If you tell me that between now and April, they re-sign Mike Onwenu, they acquire a veteran tackle that they feel like can not a Riley Reeve, right? Like somebody that can come in here and actually play.
Right.
And they're in a new system with a good offensive line coach. And when I say new system, this McVay-Shanahan system, one of the good things about it is that it makes life a lot easier on the offensive line because of how much they move the pocket. So that allows it almost allows the scheme to protect the quarterback in a lot of ways. So you're not making the offensive line, leaving them out to dry as much in just like straight drop back type of situations. So if you're telling me that they do all four of those things, Onwenu, upgraded veteran tackle, offensive line coach who I like, and a scheme that I like, then maybe we can get to April and say I would take MGH over Joe Alt. But until I check all four of those boxes, I'm taking the tackle. I'm taking the blindside protector. I'm building it out through the line of scrimmage just like Detroit did, and I'm trying to play man football like you like to say, Alex, right? Like, play a little man football for a little while, and hopefully you find that quarterback some way, somehow. The Lions found it with Jerod Goff, just trading for Jerod Goff, Matthew Stafford. Maybe they find it in the second round. Maybe it's Penix. Maybe it's Bo Nix. I hate to say it, but maybe it's J.J. McCarthy, right? Like something like that. Yeah. But maybe that's the direction that they go in. But again, this is like an argument that we're going to have for the next 4 months of, if not quarterback, do you go tackle or receiver? And I'm just saying in that situation, if not quarterback, I'm going tackle. That's where I'm at.
And I think part of it is, too, you have to factor in, because I saw some people in the chat say, oh, if you don't draft Marvin Harrison Jr. and you draft a quarterback, who's he throwing it to? There's free agency.
Right.
There's rounds 2 through 7. The reality of the quarterback position is, outside of some massive, I don't want to say flukes, but not like Brock Purdy's an anomaly. You can't build your offseason around planning to find Brock Purdy in the 7th round. That's just it's not going to work.
And there's also, the side of it that, I've laid this out before.
Yeah.
There's 3 elements of offense, right? It's system, it's receivers, it's four, I guess. Quarterback, offensive line, right? Like those four boxes. You can probably
running backs.
I'm forgetting running backs. You can probably do it with 2 or 3 out of the 4. You can do it. If you have a really good offensive line and you have a really good quarterback, you can probably make do with lesser than receivers. Just like the Brock Purdy model, the opposite is true.
You also don't need to have lesser than receivers. Again, to go back to the Texans, they found Tank Dell a serviceable player in the third round, fourth round. Where did they get Nico Collins? You look at some of the top young receivers in the league. These guys are day 2, day 3 picks in this draft. Evan, I'm getting ready for the Senior Bowl here, and I usually pick 3 or 4 players at each position to highlight when I write my preview. I can't chop any of these receivers. I mean, this is as deep a wide receiver class as we've seen in a long time. You can get guys who will be legitimate playmakers, not just like there and filling out a roster spot, but now you have to find the right guy. That's not to say it'll be all of them. You got to find the right guy, develop them. But there are guys to be found and developed on day 2 and maybe even early day 3 that, have 1,000-yard potential, that have at the very least low-level wide receiver 1, high-level wide receiver 2 potential. And that's at the least. There's guys not named Marvin Harrison Jr. in this class that'll maybe even go on day 2 that have the potential to be Pro Bowlers. So you can't say that about quarterback. You can't say it as much about tackle. You do a little bit. We'll get into that. But there's just – and then you go to free agency too. You go to the trade market. There's so many other ways to get wide receivers again. Marvin Harrison Jr. is not the only wide receiver who will be available in NFL history. And I feel like some people are losing sight of that.
We're also looking at, like to your point, you look across the playoffs this year. You look in Houston. Nico Collins has a breakout year with C.J. Stroud. Tank Dell was on that trajectory until he got hurt. Both those guys are mid-round draft picks. You look in Green Bay, Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs, both mid-round draft picks. Jaden Reed, also a mid-round draft pick. None of those guys were first-round picks. You look in Detroit. Amon-Ra St. Brown going where he went was because sometimes teams overthink it. Amon-Ra St. Brown was awesome at USC. The big reason why he went later was because of his 40 time, because of his size, right? Like those types of things. But he was a football player. He was a baller at USC, and his tape was phenomenal. But he falls in the draft because of his size and things like that. Sam Laporta, early second-round pick. So that all these teams that are left standing, I guess besides the Niners, but even Brandon Ayuk was a late first-round guy. Like he wasn't, top 10 type of pick.
Right.
So none of these teams that are left standing right now, Zay Flowers, early 20s, right, last year with the Baltimore Ravens.
Which, by the way, the Patriots can realistically get to if they find a wide receiver in that range they really like.
There really isn't a whole lot of teams in this playoffs that have gone far with the number one bona fide, Jamar Chase. And it obviously has happened in recent years, so I'm not saying it's never happened. But Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase have done it. But other than that, this year has been a good year for what I'm trying to say, which is the entire roster building through the line of scrimmage, building through the quarterback, things like that. These teams are not loaded with like first round Marvin Harrison Jr. type receiver talent. They might have guys that have gotten to, Pro Bowls or 1,000-yard receiving years because of their talent, but it was later on in the draft, so it's a good point. All right, let's go to Max, is in Washington, D.C. What's up, Max?
Hey, guys. I'm curious which players on the roster and free agency you see as a better or worse fit with a McVay offense. I know you mentioned Demario Douglas already. Be interested in how you think he might be used. Is there a way to scale up what the Rams did with Tutu Atwell this year? And then curious if you think Onwenu would still be a fit at right tackle. Thanks.
Yeah, Max, it's a good question on Onwenu because, he's a bigger power downhill run blocker at the position. If they're going to run outside zone here, Alex, and it's not a great fit to have a 340-pound tackle, trying to block a stretch run. That's just not really what that's all about. Do I think that he could do it? Yeah, absolutely. I think he's good enough. He's just talented enough to be able to do it. Is it a perfect fit? No. In reality, a guy like Cole Strange, City So, those guys are a little bit more athletic and they'll have a little bit more range and athleticism at their positions for the interior in that type of system. Another guy, not that anybody wants him back necessarily, but Trent Brown is definitely not a fit for that type of scheme. So if they go in that direction, it would be interesting to see if they end up prioritizing Onwenu on the same level, because I don't think that it's a great fit in terms of what they would want to do schematically versus his skill set.
Yeah, and that's why some of this stuff with the free agency and the draft at certain positions, like we'll get into linemen and receivers, like you said, we got to talk a little bit generally still. And we've been doing this for months now, but it's who's coaching the team, right?
Yeah.
That's where that thing comes back.
Yeah. I would actually be pretty fascinated to see how they view Onwenu if they do hire Zach Robinson.
You know what? At the same time, Zach Robinson's this like offensive genius. Incorporate a 340-pound tackle into a West Coast scheme. Maybe there's a way to do that. You
certainly can. There's certain elements, I should say, of that scheme that Onwenu would be perfectly fine at it and probably really good at. They in LA after the Super Bowl against the Patriots, where they lost and only scored 3 points, a big part of what McVay did, other than now obviously upgrading to Matthew Stafford, but a big part of what McVay did was he incorporated more downhill run into their offense because teams were just sitting on the edges on the outside zone stuff. So he did incorporate a lot more duo in particular to run downhill and stress people in between the numbers so that they couldn't just put double edges out or 6-1 fronts like the Patriots used in that Super Bowl and just line up guys all across the front and blow up outside zone, because we can come at you if we have to, if that's how you're going to play us. So in that respect, Onwenu obviously fits that box, right? He can, he's great on double teams, duo schemes, things like that. And he would be fine in their drop back pass game. When it comes to third down, when it comes to 2 minute, when it comes to those types of situations, he'd be perfectly fine in their West Coast, what is more like a traditional West Coast package when they get into that type of offense. Their early down stuff is obviously very heavy outside zone. But when they get into third down, it's a normal drop back passing game. Like, it's obviously a little bit different than what the Patriots are currently doing, but it's cut from the same cloth and everything is. So Onwenu would be fine in like 3 out of the 4 phases. It's just the base of that offense is outside zone, and he would not be a great fit in the base element of that scheme. So that
you could probably tell me if this is a comp better, or you tell me how good of a comp this is. But in 2021, they made it work with the 330-pound, 39-year-old Andrew Whitworth, who wasn't that mobile at the time, right? If Whitworth can make it work, and I think he was on the left side, right? So
so he was playing left tackle, and Whitworth, I do remember him being pretty. It's not so much about if you can cover 10, 15 yards side to side. I think it's more about like those reach blocks on the line of scrimmage and things like that. Like if you're out leverage and you have to reach the 3 technique as the tackle and he's playing inside of you, do you have the foot speed, do you have the explosiveness out of your stance to then get inside of him and turn him out? Those types of things are difficult to do when you're that size. So that's why a guy like Onwenu or Trent Brown, like, they just want to come right at you. They don't want to have to be moving laterally. And I it's not impossible for Onwenu to fit it, and I have seen him block outside zone in the past pretty well. It just is a much smaller sample size of what they've done here.
Yeah, I got you.
All right, Mo is in Orlando. What's up, Mo?
Hey there, guys. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Got to say, enjoy any content that you guys put out.
Thank you.
Kind of touching on this, off-season moves and stuff, with New England having so much money to really spend, I really think that there is a path that we could really set New England's offense up for success, like in the here and now. First step, I think, re-sign Onwenu. You give him tackle money if you have to, but I would put him at right guard. Go get yourself Jonah Williams from the Bengals. There's your right tackle. Now here's where you guys might not like it so much, but you re-sign Trent Brown, short-term deal, and you draft like a developmental tackle in the third, and have him take over once Brown is gone. That would leave Sidiso shifting over to left guard. Strange is now the odd man out. If David Andrews retires, you could try and develop him at center, or just, move up Jake Andrews as a starter. Re-sign Hunter Henry and Farrell Brown, draft another tight end, and try and get yourself a T. Higgins and free agency. Sounds like he might just come back on they just might franchise tag him. So if that's not possible, I think Mike Evans might be more realistic. That way, when it comes to your third pick, you take your quarterback. Hopefully May is there. I wouldn't mind Daniels, but I think May might be the better fit. And draft another receiver in the second round, and as well as Kendrick Bourne, if you can, to play your Z. And I just want to see if you guys agree, if this is realistic, or if this is something that the Patriots could actually, make work. So I'll take my question off the air. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Mo. That was a lot, but I, in terms of like my dream offseason, I think Mo hit on a lot of the same things that I would hit on.
I would say besides the offensive line stuff, he pretty much nailed it.
Right. It's basically you're looking at, go after the big fish in the receiver market in free agency, whether it's T. Higgins, Michael Pittman, Mike Evans.
I'm opening up more to Michael Pittman, by the way.
Yeah, he's a good player. Calvin Ridley, whoever it ends up being. Bring Kendrick Bourne back, and then draft one of these, deep receiver class, draft one of these guys in the third round, third round, right? And then you're looking at a receiver room of Michael Pittman Jr., Kendrick Bourne, Demario Douglas, and whoever the guy is that you draft on day two. That's a pretty good room. And then maybe, a Juju, a Devontae Parker, a Tyquan Thornton are still here to fill it out, right? Fill out the depth chart.
Right.
That's a strong room. It's not an elite room, but it's definitely better than what you have. Then you look at...
You're going to be middle of the pack in the NFL in terms of receiver talent.
Yeah, especially if, the day two guy is good.
Right, especially, obviously, like, assuming you hit on that guy.
Yeah. Then you're looking at the offensive line. I have very little, love anymore for Trent Brown. Like, I would much rather see them go in a different direction than Trent Brown. He mentioned Jonah Williams, right? Jonah Williams, I think, is an intriguing project of, like, just can he bounce back from the injuries and maybe you get that first round talent out of him. But I would be cool with that as like a bridge to somebody that you draft. But you have to have a more concrete long-term plan than Jonah Williams. Jonah Williams is not going to be your tackle for the next 5 years. Maybe he's your tackle in 2024 if he can stay on the field, but he's not going to be your tackle long-term. So I'd look at that and maybe as like a bridge, kind of like what they tried to do with Trent Brown in 2018, right, to Isaiah Wynn.
Right.
Am I ready to give up on Cole Strange? My biggest problem with Cole Strange right now, Alex, is not necessarily film or what he was putting out there. It's durability. There's a chance that he's just not maybe too small, right, to play the interior. And maybe if you move him to center, that helps. Usually you can get away with it a little bit more at center in terms of size and things like that. But something this year, he was injury riddled, basically didn't have a training camp because of injury, in and out of the lineup at times, and then he is completely out of the lineup to end the year with a knee injury. So I think that durability is a big question mark with him, but I do think that he was getting better in terms of what he was putting on film. And Sidiso, I like him at right guard. I think that he's a good fit there. Would I mind flipping him to left guard? No. But I still think that out of all of the plan that he just laid out, the one thing that I would maybe push back on a little bit is that they have to have a more premium asset at the tackle position, whether that's the 34th pick in the draft, whether that's trading for a more established veteran tackle, whatever the case may be. I need to have a really good plan of how we're going to address left tackle.
Yeah, that's it. You're moving a bunch of pieces around and not really solving anything in the plan that he laid out. And I think you want to have. I'm not saying you're going to have all 5 spots figured out for the next 5 years, but you want to come out of this offseason with more direction on the offensive line. And again, what he laid out, all right, now you have a first-round pick benched.
Yeah.
You're moving a rookie to his second position in 2 years. Both your tackles are bridge guys. You drafted a project player, but they have project players. Like, what? It's different, but is it better?
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I think that one of the more underrated things about this offseason is offensive line coach. Like who they bring in to coach the line. It is such a massive, massive hire for this team right now. And I'm hoping that they're going to hit this. They're going to do better than the last time when they hired Adrian Clem.
We'll see. I mean, it's going to be up to the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, it's a big hire. I think offensive line coach, in terms of position coaches, like going down from the coordinator level, I think offensive line coach is the most important assistant coach on your entire staff.
I'd still go quarterbacks coach, but I'll give offensive line coach.
Well, I guess I usually assume the offensive coordinator has a big hand in the quarterback, so that lessens some of the burden.
I'd say if you're for the Patriots, if you're going to have a rookie quarterback, that quarterbacks coach is so important. If you're a team with an established quarterback, then like in a bubble offensive line. Yeah,
it's a huge deal. And the last thing there that I wanted to touch on, what I'm trying to follow all these steps here. Oh yeah, Hunter Henry. I would look to retain Hunter Henry. I like his idea of bringing back Hunter Henry and Pharaoh Brown, and then drafting a tight end on day 3 at some point.
Early day 3. I think Hunter Henry is a very clear franchise tag candidate. It would actually be a decrease in pay from last year, sets him up as a bridge guy, and then you draft his replacement. He also adds veteran leadership to a room that's going to have a lot of change. There you go.
I look at Hunter Henry and I look at their tackle spot, Alex, and just this is what happens when you ignore needs and you keep on kicking cans down the road. We've been talking about drafting tackle and drafting a developmental tight end to pass the torch to, really at both spots, but tackle hopefully a more immediate solve, and then tight end. Yeah, you have Hunter Henry under contract. You had Jonnu Smith under contract. You had Mike Gesicki, whatever, but they never really had anybody in the pipeline. And this is a big reason why I don't think that Bill Belichick is here anymore, is because they stopped planning ahead for these types of holes. We've been talking offseason after offseason
if
about
I could just
tackle.
recharacterize that, I think it's a mix between stopped planning ahead and got behind the sticks because of poor asset management, right? Like, if Isaiah Wynn works out, they don't need a plan ahead. Like it was a backup. There was a backup of needs.
But we've been talking about tackle as like a premium need on this team. Like they need to do something big to address this for 2 or 3 off seasons now. I want to say
it's more than that, Evan. I think it's as long as me and you have covered the team.
Since Isaiah Wynn, I would say for me, since Isaiah Wynn went belly up, right? Like since we figured out like maybe 19, 20 times, somewhere around there, that Isaiah Wynn was not the answer. That has become a real big need for this team. Last year, we talked ad nauseum about the free agent market at tackle, the guys in the draft at tackle, and they did neither. Like Riley Reif and Calvin Anderson is doing neither. Like, I'm sorry.
I don't think we talked about either of those guys until they were signed.
Yeah, because we were thinking bigger. I understand that not all of those guys, PFF would tell you that not all of those guys from the free agency class last year panned out for their teams. Like McGlinchey, I think, had a pretty rough year in Denver. But like, I don't necessarily put a ton into that because that doesn't necessarily mean what they would have done here. And it was such a big need that Orlando Brown, Jawan Taylor, Mike McGlinchey, Caleb McGarry, even an Andre Dillard, who I also didn't have a great year where he was at. Was it Tennessee? Tennessee.
Yes.
Those guys they were better bets than what they ended up with. And they cheaped out at it because I think they looked at it and said, we're paying for C+ talent, which normally I would say I would agree with. But I think on the offensive line, having just like a solid starter at a spot is way more valuable than some other places on the team. It's way more valuable to just have a guy that's not going to completely sink your offense at a tackle spot than, let's just say, having like a league average receiver. I think that really helps you out a ton because it just allows you to be a functional offense. That's what offensive line play is. Yeah, you can have a dominant offensive line like the Detroit Lions do, and that can be like a tone for your team, right? Like that can really set the tone of how you are as a football team. But you can also just have an offensive line that doesn't screw it up. And you have to at least be at that baseline. You have to be at the not screw it up baseline. And guys like McGlinchey, guys like Orlando Brown, they would have done that for this team. They would have been able to be C-plus starters, if not more than that for this team, and they passed on it. So here we are again, talking about offensive line, and now they have other holes too, and the third overall pick in the draft is probably going to go to a quarterback, so now we're really talking about offensive line at 34 or at 68, because the offensive line free agency class, let me tell you, it is horrible, Alex. It's a dark place. Like, Mike Onwenu is the best one, and he's the guy you already have. So,
and Trent Brown might be second.
Yeah, Trent Brown might be the second best tackle available on the market. Like, Tyron Smith is available, but he's either going to stay in Dallas or retire, I would think.
Right.
And then you're going down to guys like Jonah Williams, who are more like rehabilitation projects. So it's tough sledding in the tackle market right now in free agency. All right, Mark is in Connecticut. What's up, Mark?
Hey guys, how you guys doing today?
Good.
So got a good one here for you. So I've been torn between Marvin Harrison Jr. or Jaden Daniels now for a while, but we're forgetting that there is a beast of a tight end in this draft who is a generational talent, and that's Brock Bowers. And we've been needing a tight end for a long time. So what about moving back 4 spots, picking up another second-round pick or whatever you get for it, and you can pick Brock Bowers, and then in the second round you can pick a Bo Nix type of person, you can get your tackle, and then in the third round you can pick a receiver. I just figured maybe, we can get a couple of pieces by doing that. I just wanted you guys to take on that.
Yeah, thanks for the call, Mark. So, Alex, have you heard Mel Kiper's name for the 9 offensive prospects at the top of the draft? I think he called them the Nifty 9, which I hate. We need to do better.
Stupid.
We need to do better than that. But the point, to Mark's call here is that the consensus board that we use right now, Alex, the mock draft database consensus board, it's 9 in a row offensive players at the top, 1 through 9. All offense. Right?
And I'll just say, I don't think it's ultimately, so that's the consensus board. That's not the consensus mock. I don't think you're going to see 9 offensive players unanswered. All right, well, the consensus mock has 7 offensive players in a row, and then Dallas Turner jumps in.
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about these guys because I've now watched all 9 of them. So you have the 3 you have the 3 quarterbacks, right? You have Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, who we've talked about enough. You have the 3 receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, and then you have the 2 tackles. You have Joe Alt and Olu Fashanu, and then you have Brock Bowers, right? And Brock Bowers is the last one that I watched because probably the least likely to draft a tight end. But you've been talking about Brock Bowers for 2 years, which is typical. But he's outrageous. Like I don't know how else to describe it. Like he's terrific. He's as complete of a tight end as I've seen in the draft in the last 4 or 5 years. There are other guys that TJ Hawkinson coming out was a really good blocker. He probably was as good of a point of attack blocker as Brock Bowers is. I thought Sam Laporta was as good potentially as a receiver, but the whole package of being able to block and being able to impact the pass game like he does, I don't think I've ever seen it. The comp that I think is probably pretty fair is George Kittle. I think that's exactly how he plays. Not exactly the most, quick twitch at the top of the route like Laporta is. Like he's not a big change of direction guy, but he's extremely explosive up the seam. He's really a vertical threat at the position. Like he can run the seam, he can run the wheel, he can run a post, crossing route. Like he can get open on the vertical plane. And then he's also got an unbelievable ability as a ball carrier, like really elite yak guy. And then you add in the blocking too. That's extremely valuable for an offense to have a tight end that's that versatile. And I have to admit, watching him block with his hand in the dirt, it really did like hit home with me that I was like, man, this is so valuable. Not to pick on Hunter Henry or whatever, but the Patriots haven't truly had an extra offensive lineman type at blocking at the end of the line of scrimmage since Gronk. And that, just watching the Georgia offense and how valuable he is as a blocking chip, whether it's in line, whether it's detached from the formation where he can, block at the point of attack on a screen or a jet sweep or something like that, he's a rare specimen. But it just doesn't make a ton of sense in terms of the positional value, and all that type of stuff. But in terms of talent, generational talent, I would say at the position.
I mean, Evan, how many times the last few years the top tight end in the draft is always anointed baby Gronk, right? And remember last year, everybody, you can't miss Michael Mayer. You can't miss Michael Mayer. Excuse me. It was like, can't miss Michael Mayer. Can't miss Michael Mayer. You could. The whole baby Gronk thing. This is the guy. And I'm not saying he is Gronk. Nobody's Gronk. But like, if you were going to give anybody that title, he is. I would say he's the best tight end prospect, definitely since Kyle Pitts. Let's not forget how elite Pitts was, and I don't think that was a misvaluation. I think the Falcons just don't know how to use him.
Yeah.
And I mean, you go back before him to find another tight end to that level. You got to go way back, like way. I'm still scrolling here. It's been a while. So he's a tremendous player. He's a tremendous all-around player. I think some of it goes back to what we talked about with Harrison. It's just so hard to start a rebuild at that position. He's more, that's the kind of guy you take when you have a high first-round pick because you traded for a pick or your quarterback was hurt or something like that. Like
you look at like a team like the Chargers the Bears. Yeah, that have a decent roster around, already going in the right direction personnel-wise. And you add Brock Bowers next to Keenan Allen, next to Mike Williams, like that becomes a real factor. So Michael Mayer, I'm glad you brought those guys up. Like Michael Mayer, to me, the comp was always like a Hunter Henry as a receiver.
He's a better blocker than that.
He's a better blocker, but I just mean in terms of the receiving side of things, where he's a really steady receiver, but he wasn't an explosive guy, right? Like he's not like a big play type of player. Whereas like Laporta was more of that explosive big play receiver, but he didn't have the blocking chops. So like to keep it in perspective with Brock Bowers, I think that he's like a combination of the two of those guys, right? Like he is a receiver like Laporta, but he's a blocker like Mayer. And that is just
he's a better blocker than Mayer.
He's a really, really rare
blocker like Darnell Washington.
It's a really rare. Well, Darnell Washington found out, Anthony Jennings told Darnell Washington.
Nobody could block Anthony Jennings this year. That's not fair.
I'm just saying, like.
No, nobody could block him this year. Like, it wasn't just Darnell Washington.
So
let's give Anthony Jennings his credit.
That's fair. But yeah, you can't deny it. Watching these guys, through the top of the draft here, I feel the same way about Malik Neighbors. Like Malik Neighbors is a fantastic prospect too. His ability, it's not just like that he's fast in a straight line, but he's got that ability to gear down, which I love. Which like you can start at first gear, and then as you're running the route, you go from 1 to 6, right? 6 gear, in a car analogy here. Like that allows you to really vary speeds and pacing and things like that. That's how you create separation. So he's one of those guys that Malik Neighbors will like lull you to sleep, and then all of a sudden he turns on the jets and nobody can come close to reaching that type of acceleration, and he's just by you. And that's rare talent too. That Evan, pops off the film at you with that.
This is something I've talked about, but now that you've watched these guys, I can finally ask you this.
Yeah.
How many of these receivers in this class? How deep into this class was Quentin Johnson? Was the first? Ended up being the first wide receiver drafted last year, right? Yeah. Was it him or was it Zay? I can't remember. They all went in a row.
All went in a row. I want to say that you're. Here, I'll look it up, but keep going.
It was JSN. It was JSN at 20. How far into this class would you rank JSN?
So I'm not a Keon Coleman guy.
Right.
So I would say.
Did you watch Brian Thomas?
I haven't watched Brian Thomas specifically yet, but I obviously saw him when I was watching Daniels and Neighbors. So I've watched LSU film enough.
Wait, so you watched Troy Franklin, but you didn't watch Brian Thomas?
Yeah, because I watched Troy Franklin because I had seen some things on Twitter about Troy Franklin, and I kind of thought I was gonna like him, and I kind of did like him. So I was curious, so I jumped to him.
But you're not curious about Brian Thomas?
Not as much, because I feel like Brian Thomas is in like a weird spot of the draft for the Patriots.
Oh, he's in a great spot in the draft for the Patriots.
You think? I think he's gonna
late first, early second.
I don't think he's gonna last that long.
You think he might move? All right, fair enough.
I think he's probably going early 20s at the lowest.
Okay.
So I would say that between the big three, right, and Brian Thomas, like maybe we would start talking about JSN as like wide receiver 5 in this class.
Okay.
In that category.
I think, did you have him as wide receiver 1 last year? Or was it Zay?
Yeah. I
You
had
had him as wide
JSN
receiver
1 and
one.
Zay
Okay.
Flowers 2. Yeah.
So just to kind of paint the picture I'm saying of this class, because I think people believe it more when they hear it from you than when they hear it from me. So you'd have had last year's wide receiver 1 as wide receiver 5.
Yeah.
Where would you had you want to try to place the other 3 for me, or?
Okay, so Quentin Johnston, he would be low. I would probably have Quentin Johnston.
Well, where would you have him compared to Keon Coleman? Because it's the same kind of player. Keon Coleman is kind of the top version of that player in this draft.
Yeah, I would say Keon Coleman, though, has better ball skills than Quentin Johnston.
Okay.
That was
So
my
let me-
biggest knock on Quentin Johnston was his hands and his ball skills. Like, what we saw here in New England, I know it was raining and that was like a factor, but that was not an anomaly with Quentin Johnston. His hands are
Right.
horrible. He's bad at tracking the ball. He's bad in contested catch situations. Keon Coleman also has some not so great contested catch numbers, believe it or not, but he has some real, as you know, he has some crazy highlight catches. So I'd look at, oh man.
I mean, I can keep going here. A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Legette would be the next 2 guys that kind of fit that mold.
Yeah, I would say that I'd have Quentin Johnston probably right after A.D. Mitchell. I love A.D. Mitchell. I think he might be a better player than Quentin Johnston.
Okay.
Because A.D. Mitchell, the thing that I love about him, well, first of all, he catches the ball better. So that's one.
Great hands.
But second one is his body control. I think is phenomenal. Whereas like Quentin Johnston was more, he's an explosive guy. Like he can get down the field and he can, build up speed. But I think A.D. Mitchell's body control, hands, ability to work the sidelines, like all the details of his game, I think are better. So I would probably have a guy like Quentin Johnston as like wide receiver 7 or 8 in this class.
Okay.
Right.
Did you watch Legette yet? I know he'll be at the Senior Bowl.
No, because he's going to be at the Senior Bowl.
Okay.
So I'll watch him there.
You'll like him.
Yeah, I think so as well. And especially if they're going to go McVay offense, like I'm interested in his skill set. The guy that I really like out of this next group, though, is Jalen Polk. I think Jalen Polk would be a really fun receiver for them. Can play X, can play a little Z. Explosive guy, runs really good routes. I really like Polk a lot. And I like what
Am I crazy to say I see a little Jacoby Myers in his game?
No, I could see that. I think he's a little faster than Jacoby.
He's a little more explosive, and I don't think he sees the field. Obviously, Jacoby was a quarterback, so that helps it. But like, I think in terms of a guy that can consistently move the chains.
Yeah.
Like I see him as like a reliable chain moving wide receiver. But like you said, he's got. I think you've referred to him as like day 2 Jacoby, where like he's got a little more pop than Jacoby did coming out, where there's a little bit more of a big play threat.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think his ability to get down the field is a little bit better than Jacoby's, right? Like the vertical ability. But he's a fun player too. And I like Roman Wilson from Michigan too. And
yeah, I do too.
Lab McConkey's going to be at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah.
We'll see about him. I saw some things about him, with Brock Bowers' film and things like that I liked. He's one of those guys though that he's got like sneaky speed and he doesn't have any wasted movement at the top of the route, which can be valuable. He's not a game changer, I don't think, at the position, but he's really technically sound, which I think is helpful as like a wide receiver 3 type,
Right.
But he's definitely not somebody that I'm saying is like a number 1 guy. Quickly before we take the rest.
Hang on, I got to ask you to place one more guy, Zay Flowers.
Oh, I love Zay.
I know. I want to make you do this one.
I would say that Zay, I'd probably put him right in the area of the 2 Texas guys.
Okay.
He's really similar to Xavier Worthy. They're really similar players. I think Xavier Worthy is just a little bit bigger than Zay is. So I think that helps him.
So somewhere around like wide receiver 6, wide receiver 7.
Yeah. That's probably fair.
So again, just to point out what this wide receiver class is, all these guys are first-round picks last year. Evan has at least 3 of them graded as second-round picks in this class.
Yeah, Jordan Addison too. Jordan Addison would be a like right in the Texas guys range, right? Like, early second round type. So yeah, it's an incredible class. It is. And that's, I think, a big part of it that we keep on stressing is that you can get these receivers pretty much throughout the entire, I would say, top 75, top 100 picks. There's going to be guys that are going to go in this class that are going to be day 1 impact players. Like that's just how good the class is. Now you have to get the right one, which we know the Patriots have had
right,
issues
and then develop
with.
them.
Yeah, but in terms of the talent, All of them are there for the taking in terms of, guys that can come on this team. And no, I'm not saying that they're going to be 1,000-yard receivers right out of the gate. But is anybody upset about the season that Pop Douglas just had? Right? Like, guys that can come in and make an immediate impact. And
Right.
I think that's a big part of it. Quickly before we take the more calls and get into the Senior Bowl, I did mention Joe Alt and Olo Fashanu. So I watched both of those guys. I'm not going to lie to you, Alex. Joe Alt just he does it for me. Like that guy is just exactly
Told you.
When I watch tackles in the draft, I want my tackle to play exactly like Joe Alt. That guy is going to be a 10-year NFL franchise cornerstone. I'm telling you that right now. And I say that always with the caveat that if injuries come into play, right? Like you can't predict who's going to get hurt.
Right.
But if he stays healthy and he stays on the field and all that kind of stuff, he is going to be an impact type of starter. Like when we talk about the cliches with tackles, you draft this guy, you plug him in, you don't worry about it for the next 10 years. I truly feel that way with Joe Alt. I think that he's that good. He's athletic. He can move his feet. He can get out of his stance well. He blocks on the island well in pass protection. He's not exactly like a people mover. I wouldn't describe him in the run game, but he does finish well. And he's a really good positional blocker with his footwork and his leverage and things like that. He walls off guys. Like he's more of like a wall off type of blocker than you turn on the film and he's moving guys 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. But that's okay too. He's all around just great all around. Like there's really not a whole lot of flaws to his game. I thought he dominated Ohio State in those edge rushers. Like didn't even flinch. I think the one flaw with him on film is that he does get bull rushed a little bit sometimes, but I think that's more of like technique than anything. I think that's correctable, and you'll figure out a way to fix that with him over the course of time. He's terrific. I wasn't as into.
I just real quick on Alt.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'd say again to everybody, who says how could you when we take the quarterback out of it and do just tackle receiver. How can you not take Marvin Harrison Jr.? He's a generational wide receiver prospect. He's that Joe Alt's that, but a tackle.
Yeah.
I don't know if you would agree, but that's how I feel. Everything you hear about the hype down to, because I know a lot of people like to point to Marvin Harrison's pedigree there. Joe Alt's dad, it was also a great NFL player. John Alt was a tackle for the Chiefs for I think 10 years, 12 years, was a multi-time All-Pro. So, I mean, you're literally talking about the same makeup, just, say in terms of the scouting report where, highly technically skilled, great build, the athletic, all of it, the background, the pedigree coming from a big school. There's a lot of overlap between Alt and Marvin Harrison Jr.
When you watch offensive linemen, especially guys like that, like Joe Alt, first round, top 10 type of guys.
Yeah.
When you watch a guy like Joe Alt, I know he plays left tackle for Notre Dame, but if I didn't know what position he played and who he was and what number he wore, I'd still be able to point him out, right? Like I'd still be able to turn on the film and be like, that's probably the guy I'm supposed to be watching, right?
Right.
Because he's that good that he stands out above the rest of his peers that much. And I think the biggest thing with him, again, is that he's a total package. He can pass block, he can run block, he's got size. There's no questions physically with his game. He's got length, he's got good hand placement, good hand strength, he's got good feet, good foot speed, athleticism.
He's young too. He's only 20, so he's got still room to grow and fill out.
I know. Look, I know that I'm going to be the only one that's excited if they take him. I know that. That's all right. I'm willing to be the only one.
I remember in October, somebody called in about a take I had on another show saying I'd rather have Alt than Marvin Harrison, all confused.
Yeah. I'm okay with being the only one. And when he comes, when we do the introductory press conference out on the field, and then we get to talk to him for 10 minutes on Unfiltered, usually afterwards, there was a running joke. I don't know if we published, the way I was looking at Christian Gonzalez last year, very, very pleased person. And I would be looking at Joe Alt the same way. I'd be like, hell yes. This is exactly what they need. Olaf Fashanu's got a lot of things going for him as well. I wasn't as impressed, but he's a specimen, a physical specimen. You can see that he's in great shape, and he's built very well, long arms, long limbs, barrel chested. He's chiseled. He's an athlete, and you can tell that. right off the bat. I don't think he's quite as refined in terms of like his hand placement, his usage of his hands, his footwork, those types of things as Joe Alt is. But in terms of upside, I can understand why some people might have him a little bit higher than Alt just because of his athleticism and, he's quick out of his stance. He can move and mirror guys in pass rush situations. He's really good inside hand to counter, right? When guys try to spin up or move inside on him, he's good at that. The Ohio State film was like the big one with him that everybody's like, oh, it's horrible.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was quite as bad as some people made it out to be. But there were some reps there, certainly, that he lost his technique. And that's the reason why I would have Joe Alt ahead of him. I think Joe Alt consistently gets the job done, whereas Fashanu has some lapses in technique every once in a while.
Fashanu reminds me of, we did a lot, obviously, last year on Broderick Jones.
Yeah.
Fashanu reminds me a lot of a more developed Broderick Jones, like a top 10. Because Broderick Jones, his game was raw. His game was raw, and he hadn't been playing the position as much. Fashanu was many, many more snaps under his belt, and it shows, and it should. So I kind of like a top 10 version of the player Broderick Jones was, which is a good thing.
That's a good comp. The Joe Alt comp is tough because of his size, right? Like I think he plays.
Come on, Evan, you know who it is.
Who is it?
It's Joe Thomas.
He's bigger than Joe Thomas.
Well, but Joe Thomas was like 15 years ago. Guys weren't that big 15 years ago.
That's fair. Yeah. I don't know.
Again, at the top, I've said this before. There's a little bit of hyperbole here, but it's not entirely hyperbole.
I have a tough time putting people in Joe Thomas's.
I do too, but
that's like, oh yeah, you're just going to be the best tackle of all time.
I mean, it's a ceiling comp, but when we started doing this, the Alt versus Marvin Harrison Jr. thing, the kind of mostly hyperbolic but not entirely hyperbolic question is, starting a team, you get to add one player at the beginning of their career, Joe Thomas or Calvin Johnson. Who are you adding?
Well, I'm going. It depends on your situation, though, right? Like
starting a team.
Starting a team from scratch. Yeah,
starting an offense from scratch, because that's more or less what the Patriots are doing.
I'm going Joe Thomas. You know that.
Right. There you go.
Like
And what's great about it is when people say, "Oh, you're signing you're adding a tackle. What does a tackle do?" Or, "Oh, you're adding a receiver. What does a receiver do?" Neither of those guys won anything, which is why the argument always comes back to quarterback.
All right, let's get back into the calls here. Miko is in Philly. What's up, Miko?
Hey, so going back to the coaching side, back when we were exploring if Belichick was to stay, I think one of the conditions we talked about was essentially appointing Bill O'Brien as the head coach of the offense, with a lot of sway over personnel decisions. So fast forward to now, with Mayo coming from the defensive side of the ball, is that head coach of the offense responsibility still the pitch to offensive coordinator candidates with far less experience than Bill O'Brien, like Haley or Robinson?
Yeah, thanks for the call, Miko, and sorry about the phone line. That's not you, that's us. That's a fair point, Alex. Are you going to trust a first-time offensive coordinator to start making personnel decisions and things like that? More than a fair point.
I think that was more, when we talked about that was more something that candidates were pitching to the Patriots.
Yeah.
Than the Patriots pitcher can't. It's a candidate coming in and saying, "Hey, look, I have this experience." It wasn't so much the Patriots saying, "Here's this opportunity for you." It was an experienced candidate coming in and saying, "This is what I add that some of these younger guys, some of these inexperienced guys don't."
Yeah, I think that's when they start getting into the in-person, because Jerod Mayo was on EEI the other day, and he mentioned, first virtual interviews, first round is just kind of like your standard boilerplate interview, getting to know the guy, getting to know his background, things like that.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah. The second round, when they get them here in person, is when you start putting them up on the whiteboard, right? Like that's when you start to really get into the X's and O's and how it would look. If I'm the Patriots, like I'm telling these guys to come in with their homework done, and I'm saying Drake May, Jaden Daniels, and maybe I throw just like a Penix or a Nix at them too, just to, say, cover all of our bases of how this could go, right?
Right. Day two guy, your favorite day two guy.
What's your plan, right? Like what if we draft Jaden Daniels in April, what's the offense going to look like? If we draft Drake May in April, what's the offense going to look like? That's how I would pick their brains. That's how I would go about it. And you got to like their pitch, right? You got to like what they're going to do with it. And then maybe if you do, and you say, "Oh wow, like that, he's really, Jaden Daniels, that's a perfect. We love that idea, right? Like we love all these ideas, we love what he's thinking, all that kind of stuff. Then you can sort of get into the report of like, well, okay, well, why do you like Jaden Daniels versus Drake May versus whoever, So right. I agree. I think that you have to be careful about giving too much personnel power to an inexperienced coordinator. DC is in New Hampshire. What's up, DC? We left him on hold too long. I thought that might happen. Alex is in Atlanta. What's up, Alex?
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, our first thing I want to say, man, y'all do an amazing job, so thank y'all for that, man. This off season so far, I'm loving it.
Thank you.
But
thank you.
Yeah, I just kind of got on. I don't know if y'all talked about it, but it's a receiver that I like, honestly, Keon Coleman. I don't know how y'all feel about him. Like I said again, I just joined in, but how do y'all feel about him? And that's the only question I had. But thank y'all so much.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for the call. So I'm not a big Keon Coleman guy, but I will admit that maybe my mind is a little bit scarred by N'Keal Harry, Alex. Right? Like I when I look at receivers that don't separate well at the top of the route, and a lot of the highlights that I see of them, and obviously highlights is not everything. Like you need to watch the actual film. But highlights, right, I think, are sometimes can be important, especially with receivers. It's the one time where I would say that I do actually watch some highlight reels of guys because you want to see how they win, right? Like what are like the big plays that they make and how do they make them? And when you see a lot of the highlights of Keon Coleman, it's like these one-handed catches, these acrobatic catches, which is great. But it's not a whole lot of like he wins at the top of the route, runs away from the coverage, and he's off, right? Like you don't see a ton of that. And statistically, his profile is not very good. He didn't actually produce all that much in last year, right? I think he had like 600, 700 yards receiving. And he's
a red zone guy.
His contested catch numbers, though, he's only catching like 33, 34% of his contested targets. Like for comparison's sake, Rome Odunze, want to guess how many of his contested cards?
Oh, that's got to be up over like 60, 65%.
75%.
Yeah, that dude's awesome.
Throwing a jump ball to Rome Odunze, you have a 75% chance of him catching the ball.
You know why? Because his catch radius is insane.
That is absurd. Absolutely absurd. So I look at Keon Coleman and have a little bit of cold feet. How about you?
I mean, I like Keon Coleman. Definitely more than you. I think there's a ton of value in that skill set. I think for the Patriots, you're probably, I guess what offensive system are you running? I'm so in the default of like they need more speed and athleticism, and that's not where Coleman wins. But if they're going to do the McVay thing where they need these big physical receivers,
that's a fair point, yeah.
Keon Coleman's going to be the guy you talk about. Now, I wouldn't be afraid if that's the kind of receiver you want. You want to use that pick elsewhere. You go a little further down the board. You look at his teammate, Johnny Wilson.
Yeah.
Johnny Wilson, 6'7", 235 pounds, and was reportedly running 4.4s in high school. If he does that at the combine, I mean, this guy's basically, you remember Zach Kuntz last year?
Kuntz.
That's kind of what you're looking at with Johnny Wilson. If he's really 6'7", 235 and running 4.4, it becomes DeJuan Jones, Tariq Woolen. He's going to be my guy this year that it's going to look too good to be true, but it is. Now, Johnny Wilson's hands aren't great. And you're probably going to comp him to Quentin Johnston.
Yeah.
But if you get a good wide receivers coach who can work on him with that, and the thing about Johnny Wilson, his hands are actually really good in contested catch situations. It's just when he's open. So as much as that sounds annoying, it's also more fixable. I'm not saying he's going to solve all your wide receiver problems, just like that. You'd still need to go out and get a Michael Pittman or somebody. But if you want to invest in a project guy late on day 2, and you want that kind of jump ball, physical specimen, great size wide receiver, I think Johnny Wilson's upside is tremendous. Now, his floor is not quite what it is with some other guys, and that's a risk that's going to scare people off, and I understand that, but his ceiling is unreal.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think he's at the Senior Bowl, I believe.
Yeah, I think that, I need to give Keon Coleman another watch because I know a lot of people do really like him. And I'm going to admit there's certain guys that I just think of Patriot busts in the past, right? Like, I've talked about this with the quarterbacks, Alex. Like, every time I watch a quarterback now, I'm like, why is he not Mac Jones? right? Like, what about him is just different from Mac that I can be like, all right, this is not going to go horribly wrong this time around. And I feel the same way about a guy like Keon Coleman to N'Keal Harry to some of their other, misses in that type of mold in the past. All right. Nate is in Ohio. What's up, Nate? Nate, going once. All right, Nate, you can call back and we'll get you on the air. Matt is in Virginia. What's up, Matt?
Hey, guys. First-time caller, long-time listener. I've been listening since the early Beat days, and I got to say, I love your content.
Thanks. Thank you. Appreciate that.
You guys had mentioned earlier maybe looking into the tackle trade market, maybe getting yourself a veteran. What kind of options would you say would be out there for the Patriots realistically?
Yeah, that's a good question, Matt. I'll admit I haven't. Thanks for the call. I haven't dug deep into like the veteran market so much yet, Alex. But I feel like there's always guys that come out of the woodwork. Do you have anybody on your mind? There's one that I have, but I want to make sure I get the situation right.
I honestly think the trade market's more going with a wide receiver, just because there's such a shortage on tackles. Getting anybody that's worth trading for is going to be just monumentally expensive.
Yeah. So our guy DeJuan Jones is
You think?
No. I don't think that he's going to be available. He went
okay.
He went to the Browns, right? Am I
Correct.
spacing here for some reason? Right.
He did. He's if he's not on the roster, I think he got put on IR late in the year.
So DeJuan Jones goes to the Browns, and the Browns have two. Yeah. I got this right. I don't know why I'm like.
No, he's definitely on the Browns.
No, I know. But Jack Conklin on the Browns, their right tackle, veteran right tackle, good player in the league. So they have Jedrick Willis, who's their starting left tackle, is one of the best in the league, right? So he's going to stay over there. DeJuan Jones is probably in line to take over for Jack Conklin at right tackle, right, going into next year. That could be a situation where Jack Conklin is like a lame duck type of asset. It's just somebody that is somebody that they don't need to pay anymore. So if there's one guy that I would look at in terms of being available in the veteran market at tackle, it would be Colin Cleveland, because Cleveland has embarrassment of riches on the offensive line. And they have one of the best offensive line coaches in football. I don't know if he's going to follow his son to Tennessee, but Bill Callahan coaches their offensive line, who's Brian Callahan's father. There's a chance that he might follow go coach the line for his son. We'll see, but I would call the Browns. They have like 16 tackles. One of those guys might be available. Maybe a guy like Conklin. All right.
He's got a pretty I'm just looking at it now. He's got a pretty manageable contract too. He signed through 26. Cap hit this year would be $12 million. Jumps up to 19 the next two, and then he's got 2 void years on the end of his deal, but they're pretty minimal.
I know, the Browns, because of mostly because of the Deshaun Watson contract, the Browns have an extremely high payroll. Like they're one of the highest in terms of actual, the Felger, right? The real cash spending. And they might be looking to make some cuts, guys that they don't necessarily need. Like a Jack Conklin, it could become available. All right. Before we get into the Senior Bowl, which we are going to do for the next 20 to 30 minutes here to end the show, I really quickly want to talk about Kellen Moore. And, the big news in the football world the last 24 hours was Jim Harbaugh, right, going to the Chargers. Jim Harbaugh is more than likely going to have his own staff. And Jim Harbaugh's an offensive guy. He's a quarterback guy. But he's most likely going to have his own offensive staff. And the Browns have put in a request now to interview Kellen Moore, Alex, for their offensive coordinator position. And he got blocked. There's another team that wanted to interview him earlier in the process. And the Chargers hadn't settled on a head coach yet, so they blocked the interview. But now it sounds like they're going to allow Kellen Moore to start interviewing places. I put out last night on Twitter that my mind immediately goes to Kellen Moore and what is going to happen with him when Jim Harbaugh's news was announced. And I got all sorts of pushback on Twitter. Why would you want Kellen Moore? Why would you want Kellen Moore? Alex, would you want Kellen Moore? Yes or no?
Yeah, I don't know that he'd be my top choice, but I mean, I'd be very happy if they hired him. He'd definitely be up there for me. I think I like the offenses he designs. I think they're very layered. I think that they're not easy to defend. And I think he has a good understanding of the quarterback position. and I think that he does a good job working with quarterbacks. So those are two massive boxes that are checked. I don't know, like in my mind, he'd be a flight risk because I think he's somebody who should be close to being a head coach, but it doesn't seem like the league feels that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he'll get his chance. If he comes here and he's good, he'll get his chance, but maybe get 2 years with him instead of 1 or something like that, right, if it works out. So, and then obviously there's the element of if they draft Michael Penix, which I don't think they will, but lefty quarterback, because Moore was a lefty, played in the league for a lefty quarterback. But no, I've always liked Kellen Moore. I think he's, one of the more understated offensive minds in the game. And I think his offenses would be fun to watch. And I think if you get the right pieces in place, I know we've seen it. They can be effective. I know he never really won anything in terms of the postseason, but look at who he was working for, right? I think if you give him a defense like he'd have here, and that changes a lot of things.
Yeah, it's funny because when the Chargers came here, I had written in my game preview that I had an eye on Kellen Moore. Because if the Patriots, actually, I had my eye on him as potentially a head coach candidate, right? Like crazy how far we've come. But I feel like with Kellen Moore, the thing that I really liked, about his offense is that it is West Coast based. He comes from the Mike McCarthy tree, and he does some West Coast things. But it's pretty multiple game to game. Like he's a pretty good game plan coach, and there's always some wrinkles in there. Not necessarily
you got to remember what his background is as a player coming from Boise State.
Right.
And I think he incorporates, he blends the two very well, which when I say it's multiple, like there's not a ton of things in the big picture over the course of a season that you just can kind of sit on.
Yeah. And I look at him and he does have some tricks up his sleeve, but I more look at his base offense as a pretty stable and consistent and just schematically sound type of offense. Is it as innovative and as creative as like a McVay Shanahan? No, it's definitely more in the Patriot, EP old school West Coast type of system. That's more about formations and matchups and fundamentals and like that type of stuff. But I do like a lot of the things that he brings to the table, and he's a quarterback guy, which I like.
Right.
And young quarterback guy that can do it. And the last thing that I like about him, as you could imagine, the reason why the Cowboys parted ways with him was because he wanted to score too many points. Remember that? He wanted.
Is that the Cowboys or the Chargers? Oh no, the Chargers.
It was the Cowboys.
He got fired because they didn't want to run the ball enough.
That was Kellen Moore.
Too much.
So Kellen Moore with the Cowboys, Mike McCarthy's whole thing was he wants to light up the scoreboard and I want to rest my defense, right? Like that was the whole thing, was that Kellen Moore just wanted to throw the ball 40 times a game. I'm not saying you have to have some sort of balance, right? We know that.
Right.
But I like the idea. I like his mindset. I think Kellen Moore has like an attack mindset that he wants to have an offense that's going to score a lot of points. And lastly on this topic, that I've thought that the Chargers roster talent has been overrated for a couple years now. And I still feel that way. I'm not trying to absolve them of all things. Like I know that their offense wasn't great last year.
You just don't want to criticize your boy Brandon Staley.
No. I just really don't. I think a lot of people look at the Chargers roster and they only look at the top of the roster. Right? They're only looking at Justin Herbert, Keenan Allen, some of the guys that they have on the defensive side of the ball, Derwin James, Khalil Mack, those types of guys. Their roster has had a lot of deficiencies over the last couple of years that people just want to ignore. And I think Tom Telesco getting fired as the general manager, a big reason why is because the people there are recognizing it. The Spanish see it. They have some good pieces. They have some really high-end talent. Rashawn Slater's a really good tackle, but they don't have a lot of depth to their roster. And you saw that this year when they started to have some injuries on the offensive side of the ball. Mike Williams goes down. Their offense falls off a little bit. Austin Eckler doesn't have the same year because of injuries and things like that. Their offense takes another step back, and they didn't really have any depth to supplement it. So I think some of the reason why Kellen Moore wasn't quite as successful with the Chargers isn't all on Kellen Moore. That's just my point. But is he my top candidate? No, absolutely not. But he's somebody that I would definitely be interested, if I'm the Patriots, in hearing out and having an interview with and seeing what his pitch is before I make a hire. Senior Bowl, Ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
This is your moment. All right. So, Senior Bowl preview. We'll end it here. End of the show here. I'm going to go down to the Senior Bowl. Unfortunately, I'm going solo, Alex. I'm very upset about that still, but it is what it is. So we'll be doing the show next week with me in Mobile, and Alex will be here. And you know all these guys so well anyway, Alex. So I'll just tell you who's popping and who's standing out to me, and we'll go from there next week. But I have a watch list. I'm sure you have a watch list. I want to start with the quarterbacks.
Yeah,
there's 3 guys that I know you have a couple more, maybe going deeper than me. But 3 guys, obviously.
Oh, you have 3, okay.
Well,
I thought you'd only have 2.
There's 3 big ones, I think. Michael Penix is obvious. Bo Nix is an obvious.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to be intrigued by Michael Pratt?
From a Patriots point of view, or just in general?
In general, but also let me give you this pitch.
Well, look, I'm the guy that gets mad that you don't let me talk about running backs. So you can be intrigued about anybody.
Fair enough. Let me give you this pitch about Michael Pratt.
Yeah.
Is there a chance, and I hate to typecast everybody, right? But or stereotype everybody, I should say. But is there a chance that Michael Pratt is like the Kirk Cousins to an RG3?
Oh, see, I think that's somebody else. I actually had the exact same take about somebody else.
Okay.
I think Michael Pratt is more this draft's Bailey Zappi.
Oh, really? That's disappointing.
Like, I just see him as like, I just see him as like a, I think he could be an NFL starter. I just don't see where the ceiling is. He's older. He doesn't have, that elite mobility, that elite arm talent. Like he's a good, solid, technically sound quarterback. I just don't know what I'm latching on to where it's like, hey, this guy's going to be, a starter on his rookie contract, like a franchise starter on his rookie contract.
That's fair. I do wonder what he weighs in at and like what he measures.
He actually, so
he's a little bit bigger than Bailey Zappi, right?
He is. Let me rephrase. He could be the Kirk Cousins in the sense that if you draft one quarterback and you want another guy, because Kirk Cousins was drafted to be the backup,
right?
That would make a lot of sense because I think he has an ability to, at the very least, be a high-level backup, if not a low-level starter in the NFL.
I'm just intrigued by some of the things that I saw. I don't have a ton of Tulane, all 22, I will admit, but I'm trying to get more, and we'll see what the Senior Bowl. I think he throws with really good touch and accuracy, right? Which is just at the end
when it's clean.
Yeah, sure. But at the end of the day, that still matters, Like I feel like we're getting so lost in this quarterback discourse about arm talent and off platform and extended play off script, moving, around and throwing like Patrick Mahomes. Like we're getting so into that we're losing sight of the fact that the thing that matters the most still from quarterback play is can you sit in the pocket and can you deliver on time with accuracy?
Yeah.
And Michael Pratt, I think, can do that.
He's very good at that. My thing with him is, and this is more for the Patriots than just in general, when that's not there, he doesn't really have an ability to create something from nothing.
Yeah.
And that's what I worry about with him.
Fair enough. Big week, I think, for Penix. Big week.
Huge week in a number of ways. I mean, he's got to throw the ball well, kind of offset some of the tape from the national championship. He'll probably get some medical testing done.
Talk to teams.
Just a big week for him.
I hope he practices at least one day.
Yeah, I think he will. He probably has as much variance as any quarterback. JJ McCarthy exists.
Yeah,
he has as much variance as any quarterback that's at the Senior Bowl. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, so I think that he's definitely gonna be intriguing. What I'm looking for with him is it when we watch him, you see the ball kind of just really pop out of his hand, right? He's got that instant velocity out of his hand, which we all really like. I think that that's something that is really important to see in person, though. I think you can really see that tangibly in person. How much velocity, how much arm talent does he really have on the football? We're not necessarily going to see him under pressure because he's going to be in a red jersey and he's not going to be facing pressure like that he was in the national championship game. But you can see, is the velo legit? Is that ability to generate velocity with the ball coming out of his hand legit? This is a game and a practice where other quarterbacks have really separated themselves. Justin Herbert's the biggest one I can remember over the last couple years, where he went to the Senior Bowl and he was just a dude. and it was different than everybody else. His gravitas, his talent, all of it, and then that locked him in as like a top 10 pick. I don't think Penix is going to get locked in as a top 10 pick just because of the injuries, but he can lock himself in as like an end of the first round guy, or wherever the league has him right now. Maybe we'll find out some of that too.
If anybody, though, I think Pratt is the guy that is, the way these practices are structured, it's set up for him to shine. You want to talk about velocity and arm strength, though.
Oh, God.
We got to get to my guy.
Okay, but really quickly before we do.
Yeah.
Anything from Bo Nix? Like, is Bo Nix going to do anything for you in this week? Like, if I call in on Wednesday and we're doing the show and I'm telling you, like, Bo Nix is just tearing up practice, like, does that move the needle at all for you?
If he's really focusing vertically, if he's like really showing a vertical game, then I'll be like, all right. Because like we know he can hit those, get to the back foot, get the ball out on those short and intermediate throws and put it right on a dime. Like that's been his game. And, 7-on-7 structuring kind of, it's a good setting for that. If he's testing windows, if he's splitting the ball in between zones down the field, if he's throwing jump balls down the field and he's hitting them, then it's like, all right, here's something he hasn't had. So I think he certainly has something to prove, but I think he's 61 starts under his belt. Yeah. 61 college starts. Absurd.
If you don't know, then if you don't know by now.
I would be surprised. This sounds kind of weird. I would be surprised if Bo Nix surprises us just because we have so much tape on him.
The only thing I would look at from Bo Nix, and I don't know how much I'm going to be able to like tangibly know this, but maybe just talking to some people down there, like what's he like? Like is he? I think one thing about Mac, and like we're film junkies, we're guys that watch the tape and really study these guys in terms of their football ability, but I think it has been a factor around here, just Mac's personality, his confidence and all that. Like does Bo Nix carry himself with some swagger? Like that's what I'm looking for.
It's very interesting, Nix's background. So his dad is like an Auburn legend.
Yeah.
Playing quarterback. Right. And then he grew up an Auburn fan. He went to Auburn and it didn't go well. And it wasn't entirely his fault, but he talked about after he left the pressure of being there and how miserable it was to like the pressure he put, because he wasn't doing it for himself. There's a great piece from Marty Smith, ESPN, that like he was doing it for Auburn, not for Bo. And then he goes to Oregon, at this point. So he was a 5-star recruit, son of a campus legend, starts a true freshman. He was supposed to revive the Auburn program. He was supposed to deliver Auburn a national championship. That was like his destiny, essentially, to I don't mean to sound so dramatic, but he's kind of the chosen one.
Yeah.
Flames out. He goes to undrafted, failed the school, has to transfer, goes to Oregon. Now there's no pressure and tears it up. So, and he, again, if you watch this piece on ESPN, I'll send it to you so you can watch before you get down there, because I think it does paint a brief but good picture of who he is. I think he has a very good understanding of his standing and of his journey, and I think he's willing to be changed by his journey. And I don't think that's something. I don't think everybody in a position like his you can say that about.
Bo Nix is a tough one for me because of the Auburn stuff. I can't unsee it sometimes. Like I just know
it's part of it.
I know how bad he was at Auburn. Very Jerod Stidham-y, right? Like just not consistent, not good enough. All right.
The thing is, I think Bo Nix would also tell you that, which I think is part of what makes him a little different.
Okay.
I'm not saying that means draft him, but
all right. Tell us about Bazooka Joe.
All right. So Joe Milton is the most entertaining quarterback in this draft. That doesn't mean best.
More entertaining than Jaden Daniels.
Yeah. And he's 6'6", 236. He can throw the ball 60 yards just with his top half. Now, he sprays it. His accuracy is not great, and he's great as a scrambler. He's not great as a designed runner. But you talk about, again, I'm excited for you to see him throw the football. And I was sending you some clips last night. It doesn't really make sense. You watch some of his throws and you see his mechanics, and then you see how far the ball goes. And there's nothing else like that. Now, he's obviously got to learn to rein it in, but when you talk about arm strength, size, and mobility, he checks all the boxes that you usually look for in the first round.
Yeah.
But he's older. His accuracy isn't there. He doesn't make good decisions.
Other than that, though, he's great.
But here's the thing: somebody's going to see him like early on day 3 and say, I can get the most out of this kid.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to see him early on day 3 and just look at the potential. And I wonder if he's the guy that you draft a quarterback. And it's funny because I think just on skill set, not on ability, he's somewhere between Drake May and Jaden Daniels. So you could draft either of those guys, take Joe Milton in the 4th or 5th round, and kind of develop them together. And where Joe Milton really interests me is almost as a package player. He can be your Hail Mary thrower. He'd be an excellent tush-push quarterback. He can do some things running the ball. Like, you could put him in spots and utilize him in spots where you could take advantage of the rare talents he has while maybe masking some of that other stuff. So I'm just really interested to see. I wish I could see him in person. He fascinates me. And again, I'm not saying draft him. I'm not saying make him the starter. I'm not saying he's great, but just his entire makeup is so unique, right? I talk about this every year that, excuse me, there's a lot of guys in the draft that you look at and they're really good, but there's a player that's good like that every year. There's only so many guys you look at every year where it's, you got to draft this guy now because you're not going to get him next year. Joe Milton's one of those guys where you're not going to find anybody else with his skill set. And that, again, that doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean it's good. But just as somebody who likes the game of football and enjoys the pre-draft process, he's a fascinating part of this.
All right. Well, you just went through a sickness, an illness, to just go 3 minutes on Joe Milton. So that's how you know how good he is to you, or how.
No, but again,
how much you
interesting.
Like him. Interesting. I shouldn't say good. You're right. How interesting.
I want to be clear. Like, he's interesting.
Okay. Let's talk about the tackles. So I think there's 6 tackles that are going to be in Mobile that are real considerations for the Patriots at the top of the 2nd round. So I'm going to butcher some of these names because some of them are tough.
Really tough tackle names this year.
Talisi Fugawa from Oregon State. My guy, who I really like a lot, is Troy Fautanu from Washington. Jordan Morgan from Arizona. Tyler Guyton from Oklahoma. Kingsley Sumataye.
I've still got to get. I usually practice the names, but obviously I can't speak much.
I'm very sorry. So. I'm very sorry to these people's parents. I really am. And Patrick Paul from Houston. That one's easy.
There you go. Yeah.
So I'm excited
Soft
about
landing.
this group. Especially when you go to stuff like the Senior Bowl, seeing these guys against NFL guys, draftable NFL guys, and how they handle power, or how they handle those types of one-on-ones. It's a really good snapshot for these guys. I mentioned Fautanu. He was the left tackle for Washington this past year, and they won the Moore Award. They had one of the best offensive lines in football, in college football. But I know there's a lot of love for Morgan, for Patrick Paul, for all this group. But I think it would not shock me in the least if the Patriots' 34th pick in the draft is one of these 6 guys.
Or if they move up, if they like one of them. But this is, Evan, we talk about this event as one of those things where you're sorting guys out. And right now there's 7 tackles projected to go in a 30-pick range, basically between call 20 and 50. Of those 7, 6 will be at the Senior Bowl. Marius Mims from Georgia is the lone one who won't. But, you could stack them in just about any order, these 7 guys right now, and you could probably make a pretty compelling case for it. So there's a lot to like about all of them. They certainly all have their flaws as well. I think this, especially with the offensive line position. Like last year, we did this with the receivers at the Combine, and that's because a lot of the receivers didn't go to the Senior Bowl, but we were like, remember, there were those 4 guys, and it was okay. What order do they go in? With the linemen, an event like the Senior Bowl is much more valuable than an event like the Combine. So we're going to kind of see, okay, here's these, again, Mims won't be there. Here's these 6 guys that are all projected to be within range of the Patriots. Who do you like better than who? This is kind of a big week to decide that.
Yeah, I love these events for the one-on-ones. Like, I think that's such a big thing. It's just on an island, one-on-one pass pro against NFL draftable talent on the other side. Like, how do you hold up? Because at the end of the day, that's the game now. Like, as much as we can talk about run blocking and all that kind of stuff,
right?
If you can't pass protect, that's item number 1. I remember Macro telling me last year at the Combine, number 1 is pass protection. Like, can you or can you not pass protect? Like, that's where we start with everybody. And I think that's a big part of this. All right, quickly.
So can I just to The three guys I like there that stand out to me right now, and we'll see. Fatanu from Washington, pro's pro.
Yeah.
Pro's pro, just like a ready-made NFL tackle. I like Patrick Paul from Houston. I think he has among the better upside in the group, if that makes sense. Like, I think he's a guy that, not to say he's a project player, but you can maybe get a little more from with patience. And then I also really like Jordan Morgan from Arizona, and who knows where the Jed Fish connection is at this point. But Mayo was on the staff with him, maybe a guy they can get a little more information
at least some intel out of that. How did you say it? Troy Fatanu? Maybe, I don't know.
Sorry, I was coughing. I've been saying Fatanu.
Okay, maybe down in Mobile, I'll figure out exactly how to say it.
Usually, when these guys talk to the media down there, the first question is, "Can you say your name?" For us?
Those guys. He reminds me. You said it. Pro's pro. A lot of reps. Like a lot of experience against top competition. I know the Washington offensive line got exposed against Michigan, but I thought he actually had a pretty decent game himself. Like a lot of the pressure was coming off the right side. Their right tackle got destroyed in the national championship.
I think he'll actually be at the Super Bowl as well. He will. Rosengarten. That was a guy I liked. I saw that game. He's got a lot of making up to do.
Okay, really quickly, because I only have a couple more minutes here. The group of receivers in Mobile next week.
So good.
So there's the top guys obviously aren't going, like Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Keon Coleman, Brian Thomas, Troy Franklin. Like that, the guys that are going in the first round are not going to be there.
The Texas guys aren't there either.
Oh, right. Yeah, Texas guys too. But we do have Xavier Legette, Ladd McConkey, Tez Walker, Johnny Wilson, Mackay Corley, Ricky Parcel, Brandon Rice from USC, Roman Wilson from Michigan. I'm sure there's other guys that you like too that I didn't just name, but that's like 8 guys that I just rattled off that are all going to be there. One of the most fun things about these events is obviously I mentioned the one-on-ones for the linemen. That's more like nerds like me.
Yeah.
But the one-on-ones, receivers versus corners, right? Like that's always that's where you really get the popcorn out. And I think all of these guys have some really good route running skill that could wow the crowd a little bit with some of their route running here.
I'm gonna throw a bold take out right now, Evan. There are multiple future Pro Bowl receivers at the Senior Bowl this year. Or not Pro Bowl, All Pro.
Wow. We'll see.
You don't seem that wowed by it. That sounded sarcastic.
No, that's a bold take. I don't know if I agree, but it's a bold take.
You don't think there's multiple Pro Bowl receivers there?
There could be.
I think there is. We talked a little bit about Legette already. I like Tez Walker, especially if you draft Drake May. You compare the two, kind of similar, downfield, bigger receivers. I want to give you a couple deeper guys, though, since we'll focus so much on the top guys. Ricky Pearsall from Florida.
Yep.
I'm super interested in him because you talk about a guy that plays the game ferociously.
Yeah, he's an aggressive player. He's in a good way.
Oh, in a great way. Like there's times where you talk about separating at the top of the route and you're talking about quickness. He separates physically, and it's not offensive pass interference. He just muscles his way through guys. It's really fun to watch. Great catch radius. Jacob Cowing from Arizona is a really interesting player, kind of a slot guy. Luke McCaffrey from Rice, so Christian's brother, is going to be there. And then the one other guy I want you to watch, Evan, is Jordan Whittington from Texas. I think he's the lowest rated prospect that'll be there, but he kind of got lost. He was the third receiver behind A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy, but you talk about a guy that's just steady. You talk about a guy that's reliable. Like, he's not the biggest, he's not the fastest, he's not the strongest, but he's just always open. And look, obviously some of that was, with A.D. Mitchell and Xavier Worthy helped, but not a guy that drops a lot of passes, doesn't run sloppy routes. Like, some team's going to find him on day 3, and he's going to develop into a really good complementary receiver. And I'm interested to see. Look, he's not on the level of those other guys, but I do think he's being slept on a little bit right now. I wonder if he comes away from this week or from Senior Bowl week with more of the recognition that he deserves.
Yeah, that's a good list, and I'm excited. I have an affinity for Roman Wilson. I do. I feel like I see a lot of Amon-Ra St. Brown in his game.
So I'm really interested to see then what you think of Pearsall, because I feel like Pearsall is a bigger version of Roman Wilson.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe more of an outside version too, but
I just look at Roman Wilson,
the game similar,
ability to separate, obviously, Billy as a ball carrier, yak receiver, a lot of not gadget, but like scheme touches, jet sweeps, end around, slide routes, things like that they would use him on is a lot of the different things that Detroit uses Amon-Ra St. Brown on. So I'm interested to see, but a guy like him, and then we really have to wrap, but a guy like him, Roman Wilson, he's got to be like wowing you in one-on-ones, right? Like, because he's not a big guy, so he's going to have to be a route running technician type down in Mobile. So like I said, I'll be down in Mobile, and Alex and I will do a show on Wednesday afternoon, I think is the plan from me at the Senior Bowl, and I'll just throw a bunch of names at Alex, and he'll tell me way more about him than I know. But hang on here, and Alex, thanks again for playing hurt, man.
Thanks for putting up with my voice, everybody. Yeah. I'm hoping I'll be back full strength next week.
Absolutely, and PU's up next, so don't go anywhere.
Thank you for downloading this podcast. Subscribe on Apple, Google Play, and everywhere else you listen. Like the show? Please rate and review us. Listener comments and ratings help keep us high in the podcast rankings so new listeners can find us. Be sure to check Patriots.com for more news and more podcasts.